Again, my name is Jhody Polk. In addition to being the Ambassador of Peace at the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building and the founder of the Florida Council, I am also the fourth person ever chosen in the state of Florida as a Soros Justice Fellow. And I am the new director of the Alachua County Reentry Coalition. And so I've been telling my story now for a year. When I started working as an organizer last year on the campaign to restore voting rights, I started sharing my story of incarceration. And although it has been very easy and natural for me to share my story, it was very different to feel uncomfortable to come here tonight. And I really, being at the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building, I've learned to ask myself questions when I feel some type of way rather than just reacting. And so all day I've been asking myself, why do you feel like this? Like, what is it? And after asking myself this all day on my drive here, I realized because Gainesville is my first experience of incarceration. My first experience of incarceration. When I think of the criminal justice system, I don't think of Lowell. I don't think of the county jail. I don't think of Gaston. I think of Gainesville. Growing up here in Gainesville, because my mother was on housing and she depended on a lot of government assistance, we were limited to where we could live. So I've grown up in Gainesville, but on the outside of Gainesville. We grew up in communities like Cedar Ridge, Sugarfoot, Cambridge. We grew up in neighborhoods outside of Gainesville that are supposed to be within Alachua County. And so, honestly, I want to thank Gainesville tonight, because had I not known what it was like to be incarcerated before I was physically incarcerated, I would have never made it through that 8-year sentence. A lot of times when people hear my story, and I want to be clear that this is my story and my story alone, because I was locked up here, when my physical body actually hit jail, something magical happened. When they locked me up physically, mentally I became free. And that freedom came because in that time of 7 years being removed from this community, I unlearned everything that I was taught here about who I was and who I could be. And in that space, I was able to decide and discover who I am. And a lot of times people hear all these titles and they tell me, you're doing too much, and how can you do all those things? Because I don't do them. I live them. And Gainesville prepared me for that. I went to Rollins Elementary, and that was the first place that I learned that I wasn't black because my voice sounds proper. It was in the education system in elementary school that I was taught the difference between being black and being white. And I was told that I wasn't black because I was smart, because I liked to learn, and because of the way that I spoke. Because I was overweight as a child, I was told I was ugly, because being fat, you're ugly. And because my parents could not afford certain clothes and certain shoes and couldn't afford for me to look black, I was told that I was white. And I remember up until the 3rd grade, I used to push back against it. And I would always tell, other people, show me the book on black and white, and then I will so gracefully oblige to be black. But by the time 4th and 5th grade came, my only goal was, like most 4th and 5th graders, was to fit in with my peers, fit in with my community. Because although I had this passion to learn in school, when I went back home to my neighborhood, there was no inspiration to learn. There were children who had to be adults, children who had to be parents. There were parents who had lived their childhood being adults, so now they were adults craving to once again be children. So there was no escape, there was no freedom. So my first experience with the criminal justice system was in every neighborhood outside of Gainesville where black people live like I live and identify the way I identify are excluded to. And so I'll never forget getting to prison and literally being angry with all of you. And when I say you, I'm really referencing Gainesville, dominantly white Gainesville. Even growing up here, we literally, if there were black students at UF, we said it had to be black. To grow up in a city with one of the greatest universities in the nation and never once think, believe, or even be encouraged to think, know, and believe that I could attend there. I recently had the opportunity to visit their media center at the University of Florida, and I cried when I saw those students creating vision, creating life, creating what we see, what we hear, what we know, and to know that Gainesville would never get a chance to experience me or anyone like me because we're not invited or welcome inside of those spaces. When I think of the collateral consequences just to incarceration, lack of housing, lack of employment, cut off from certain government benefits, all the things that we put onto the collateral consequences of after incarceration, that was the reality of my neighborhoods before I even went to a jail or a prison. I stayed in Sugar Hill. I always said after incarceration, I'd never come back to Gainesville. Never would I come back to Gainesville. But life pushed me back here last year. And I lived in Sugar Hill for a little bit, and I'll never forget how much Sugar Hill looks just like the work release center that I spent 18 months in before I was released. I was in Cedar Ridge, and while we talk about East Gainesville, it's interesting to me that every neighborhood, though, on the west side of town, Sugarfoot or Linton Oaks, Cedar Ridge, Majestic Oaks, all those places look just like the neighborhoods in East Gainesville. And so just recently, riding around Monday, I was in Cedar Ridge, which is where I claim my set that I guess I represent. And just on the outside, looking at the buildings, and I always question when I tell my story, I've never shared the bad or the violence or the ugliness of prison. I always just shared the life that I found in the women there. But just this week, riding around Cedar Ridge, I recognized why I never noticed the abuse, the death inside of prison, because I was already used to it. It didn't bother me when the men or the guards or people mistreated me inside of the prison, because I was already mistreated in my community. I was used to being called out of my name. I was used to using my body as a resource. I was used to fitting in. But it was in prison that I found the perfect place to fit in. Women who looked like me. Women who understood life the way I understood it. I'll never forget when I never thought I would go to prison. I was a Bells bondsman here at the San Wesley Bell Bonds. I was a dual enrollment student that went to Santa Fe. I was all these things in Gainesville, outside of my neighborhood, that I thought you all wanted me to be. But when I was in my neighborhood, I was who I had to be. And so when I got myself together, while outside in that county jail, and when Judge Lott handed down that 8-year sentence, I decided at that moment, oh well, I knew that my life would never be the same again. I knew what would be waiting for me when I came home. And so I decided that I was going to use my prison experience as an educational experience. I was going to go to prison. I was going to link up with the baddest thugs and killers and drug dealers ever. And I was going to let them teach me for the next 8 years. And I was going to come home and I was going to practice that education on all of you. But what happened is when I went to prison, I didn't find thugs and killers and drug dealers. I found mothers. I found daughters. I found artists. I found the most talented people in the world. And I was blessed enough to be placed in the law library where I became a jailhouse lawyer. And through finding myself, finally I found a safe space where I didn't have to be anybody but Jhody. And those women loved me for being Jhody. I was somebody that they could look in and see themselves, and they were people that I could look in and see me. And so as my release date approached, and it came fast, those 7 years went by so fast. As my time was approaching for me to get out, I was prepared, or at least I thought I was prepared. I came home. I got my kids within 24 hours. I got married within a year. Within a year, I was in college. I found a job within 30 days working at a hotel, cleaning floors. I remember my 5th day out, and it seems like the narrative is formerly incarcerated people can't work, don't want to work, but the truth is I had worked for free, 60, 70 hours a week for free. I was used to working. So to come home and not be able to find a job, I knew it was unraveling my plan to be successful. And so when I couldn't find work that resembled who I was, I went to what I knew, cleaning up for others. got the job, in college, married, I have my kids, I'm trying, I'm not complaining. With every no, I took it with a grin. And I believed. And it wasn't enough. Let my community tell it, I was successful. You working, you got your kids, you got a place to stay, you good. But with all those things, I found myself wanting to go back to prison. A 2018 Soros Justice Fellow, the founder of an organization, a community organizer. There are still some times today that I would rather be back there because it's safe. It was safe for me because I couldn't be me. I can't be me here. Even now, with all of my success, I enjoy a Gainesville that I never knew. I eat in some of the nicest restaurants on the west side of town. I get introduced to vegan food. I meet with leaders and community stakeholders, and I enjoy this side of Gainesville. But I go back to the community where people look like me. My lease will be up in 2 months. I've already paid out $200 in deposits, and I've been denied 5 times. When will I have to stop proving that I'm good enough to fit into this community? When will it be enough for me to be able to raise my children in a community that I don't have to be afraid of to leave them there when I work? I've always tried to find a reason, somebody, something to blame my personal experience of incarceration on. But the truth is, there is no alternative. There is no alternative for the criminal justice system. When you can't find a place to live, when you can't find food, and to be honest with you, when we're talking about resources and services, I personally don't want to repeat what my mom did of standing in lines for boxes for food. I do not want to sell myself to service providers to find out how I'm going to pay my rent. I want to have enough money in my account so I can pay my bills and still have something to do with my children. I don't want to have to work 2 and 3 and 4 jobs to pay my bills and not see my kids. The criminal justice system is not just on 39th, Lowell, in the prisons. It's in our neighborhoods. It's in the people. It is in the people. I was taught and groomed for prison, first in the school, in the neighborhood, to be a criminal. I remember having a strategic plan. The brother talked about resources, and I'm guilty of my crime. I did everything. If you pull my name up and look at that report, I did those things. And I can honestly tell you, at that moment when I chose to do them, I honestly felt that I had no other choice to get my need met than what I was going to do. I had literally convinced myself that what I needed could not be achieved in any other way. Mental health is one of the biggest resources we have here in Alachua County. But when I'm in that jail weekly and I ask those men and I ask those women, what is mental health? Nobody knows. I recently just tried to make an appointment at Meridian. Couldn't get in. When do you have time? We had storytellers last week talk about the bus system. How do you get there? When you work yourself up, it was in my moment of recognizing that I was thinking about going to prison, and I had enough training at that time to know if I was thinking it and feeling it and saying it, it would just be a matter of time before I was doing it. And because I had enough self-awareness to recognize what was going in the inside, I did one of the most bravest things of my life. And that was I reached out and I asked for help. And I see so many men and women in Gainesville reaching out and asking for help. And the answer is always no. When we smile and we talk and we hear these stories, it feels good. It sounds good. But there's no help. I don't want to be heard. I want to be seen. I want to be active. I want to participate. I want to live. I don't want people in my community to keep feeling that they have to leave. So many men and women are trying to leave Gainesville. That should not be our only option. Some of us want to actually stay. This is our home. This is our history. I want to see myself here. We keep talking about solutions, and I'm one of the most optimistic people ever. But I don't get optimistic about the solutions because I don't see the people with the problems in here. We say those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Well, we have to stop treating those people closest to the problem as if they are the problem. Yeah. I really hope, it was my goal to come up here and tell you my story. You can Google my story. You can find it all over social media. You can find it in articles. You can find it in paper. But what I really wanted you guys to know, if you didn't take anything away from tonight, is incarceration is not just physical. People are incarcerated on the inside. We are incarcerated in here. When I committed my crime, I literally was remembering a movie that I saw when I was 10 years old called South Central. I was literally using a movie and music to help me to make strategic decisions on how to be an adult. We have to be able to listen and hear people, and not just listen and hear, but give them the opportunity to do. Give us the opportunity to transform our communities into the way that we know we need them to be. We're the ones who live there. Our parents are the ones who live there. Their parents are the ones who live there. We need some major solutions, because if we don't, these numbers are going to just keep growing and growing and growing and growing. The data says that my 11-year-old and my 13-year-old, it's just a matter of time. I've been to prison. Their dad has been to prison 4 or 5 times. So according to the data, my children are going to prison. And as long as we keep looking at the data and treating people like the data, we're going to always be the data. We're going to always be the narrative. It's time to change. It's time to bring people into solution. The solution is not in this room. The solution is in the people. The solution are in these neighborhoods on the outside of Gainesville. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping that we can do, is stop just inviting the community to the table, but let's go to the community and join them at their table. I have brought plenty. I have came tonight with some solutions. I am excited. I tell my story all the time. It is an honor to me tonight to be able to hear the story of Tequila and Terrence. I did bring some information about some events that we personally have coming up in the community over the next week. Also, I've brought some information on ways that you can get involved. So if you're interested in getting involved, if you're interested in bridging over and coming into the community, I would be happy to hold some hands. That's what I consider myself to be, a bridge, and to not just help you all understand how to help me. I have white people ask me all the time what to do. I don't know what you can do. What I'm trying to figure out is what I can do. So if you want to come to the table in our community, in our neighborhoods, we'd be happy. Some of us would be happy to have you there, but it is definitely a bridge worth building.